Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a grilled cheese. Now grilled cheese sounds pretty simple, it's bread, cheese, how complicated can it be? That's mostly true, but I'm going to give it a twist. I'm going to put a cilantro pesto on top of it to give it some extra flavor. So let's take a look at what the ingredients we're dealing with are. So for cilantro pesto, you need cilantro. I have 2 bunches of cilantro right here. I have some scallions or green onions, whatever is available for you. I have 1 avocado, 2 jalapenos. These will be the ones that will be the green color in our mixture. And then for some flavoring, I'm going to have some Calabrian chili pepper. You can use Tabasco, you can use any hot sauce you want, but I'm a big fan of Calabrian chili because it gives you a nice flavor without being overwhelmingly spicy. You need some mayo, some lime juice, and some agave, and some avocado oil. Those will all be used to give the creaminess of the texture for the pesto sauce we're making. And now for the grilled cheese itself, you can use any bread you want. My preference really is sourdough, a good quality sourdough especially because it gives you the nice level of sourness that goes with the grilled cheese and that's provides a nice balance. And then for the cheese itself, you can use any cheese that you think you would prefer. You know, in this case, I'm going with a Jarlsberg cheese along with some Parmesan, but any cheese is fine. If you happen to go to the grocery store and you find a cheese that you like, feel free to go with it. There's no prescriptiveness here in terms of what cheese you need to use. So with all these ingredients, we're going to be mixing them in a food processor and then tasting along the way because the amount of lemon or the amount of agave or the amount of spice you might need will vary based on your preferences. So I encourage you to taste frequently as you'll be seeing me do in a few seconds. All right, now comes the fun part for me, which is just putting everything in the food processor, turning it on, and then tasting it to see if all the flavors are coming out correctly. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the cilantro in. I washed it, I encourage you to wash it thoroughly because there will be a fair amount of grime in it just from it doing, it growing and it's packaged and so on. And so I have 2 bunches here, so I'm going to go ahead and take the bunches and just put it in directly. And feel free to push it all the way in, it's okay. All right. So now the cilantro is in, I'm going to go ahead and then put some avocado oil. You can also use an olive oil if you want, but because I'm using an avocado to act as a thickening agent for this, I'm pouring approximately about ½ a cup. And you can eyeball this, you don't have to be very precise on this one. And then I'm going to add a pinch of salt. The salt's great because it allows you to get somewhat of water in the cilantro out and also gives it a nice tangy flavor, which will complement the lemon quite nicely. All right, so now let's go ahead and just turn this on, start getting the puree going. So now you can see the cilantro has been nicely pureed. It's going to very much resemble, if you like Indian cooking, for example, a kothmali chutney or a mint chutney. It's going to be very similar texture to that. So the next step is to just start cutting the scallions up into smaller pieces. You can put the whole thing in there depending on your food processor, but this one will just cause it to spin unnecessarily. So I'm going to cut into smaller pieces, like about 1 or 2 inch slices. Doesn't really matter. Just enough for the food processor to be able to get all the pieces and add it to the puree. I'm going to go and throw that in there once it's ready. And next up, it is the jalapenos. Now, depending on your preferences on spice, you can leave the seeds in or leave the seeds out. I'm going to keep it a little bit on the spicier end. So in this case, the seeds will actually be staying. So I'm going to cut this into smaller pieces. And let's go ahead and dice all of these. Again, the food processor will take care of actually mincing them into much smaller sizes. And the last step is to cut your avocado. And the reason I'm adding an avocado is because there's going to be a pesto meant for a sandwich. Normally you use cheese in pesto, especially if you're going to put it in a pasta. But in this case, there will be no thickness to it. The cheese will come from the bread itself. And so I want to make sure that the avocado has a certain level of creaminess that gives the pesto some body. So I'm going to go ahead and scoop up an entire avocado, throw it in here. All right, so 1/2 bit is done. Now comes the pit, which I will take out in a moment. And just scoop the rest of the avocado in as well, in just one simple motion. Let's scoop out the inside of it out as well. Okay, great. So now I'm going to add some lime juice. Now typically, about a ½ a cup of lime juice would be about appropriate. So I'm just going to eyeball it again just like before. This seems about right. And then to balance out the lime juice, add some agave nectar. Now I'm going to start small with this one. I'm going to put like maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons at first. And then we'll add more as the tasting determines how much more we need. And then it's a small amount, maybe about a teaspoon of Calabrian chili. And the last item will be about a 1/4 cup of mayo. And again, notice that I'm not exactly using a measuring cup. And that's by design, because this is a very forgiving recipe in terms of how it's going to taste, because it's very difficult to make something that doesn't taste very good. Once everything has been pureed, you'll see a nice creamy mixture coming here. So I'm going to go ahead and just try some and let's taste it to make sure everything tastes appropriate. And to taste, I like to use 2 spoons just so that I have 1 spoon that's always clean and 1 that has food on it from me having eaten it. Oh, it's actually really good. It needs a little more lemon. I'm going to add some more lemon here. And it also needs a little bit more mayo. So I'm going to add some mayo as well. And lastly, just because I added more mayo, I'm going to give it more of a liquidy texture by adding a little bit of avocado oil. Alright, now that everything's been pureed, I'm going to try it one more time to see if everything measures up. And let's see. Yep, this is amazing. This is perfect. So now that we have our sauce done, the next step is to do the other fun part of this whole exercise, which is the bread and the cheese. So for this, the way I'm going to do this is that I'm going to use a cast iron pan. You can use a regular pan as well, but it's much easier to get the edges of the grilled cheese properly covered up and heated if you use a cast iron pan. So I encourage you to use that. And start it off on like a medium heat. And let it heat up fully. Don't let it slow down. Don't let it be like mild in temperature. We want it to be a good medium heat so that way when the bread and the cheese are put on there, it all melts equally and gives it a nice flavor. Alright, so now the pan's at a good temperature and it's time to get the bread, the cheese, and our sauce to work. So there's a lot of sauce there, so I took a smaller amount and put in a cup here. The best thing about this sauce, especially if you have a bunch of cilantro that you find, is that you can make it all in bulk and then put them in jars and then refrigerate them or freeze them for use later. And so now that we have our pan ready, let me go and take some 2 slices of bread. And the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let the bread flat, next side by side next to each other. And let it heat up for a bit. Let it brown somewhat nicely. And while this is going on, I'm going to first layer on the cheese. Because you can start with the cilantro first, but in this case the bread has holes in it, which means that if I were to put the sauce, it'll just drip through and hit the pan. Not the end of the world, the worst thing could happen, but it's just much easier to use cheese where it melts and creates a nice seal. So I'm going to go ahead and layer the cheese, and feel free to be generous with how much cheese you use, because there's no such thing as not enough cheese or too much cheese in a grilled cheese sandwich. Alright, so I'm going to start with the Parmesan, layer that on top first, and then I'll go with the Jarlsberg. And again, like I said, there's no cheese you have to or not use. Use whatever you prefer. I tend to like more of the creamier cheeses because I think they melt well, and also the ones that have a milder flavor to it, just so it doesn't completely overpower the taste of the sauce that we have going for us. Alright, so we have the cheese is currently there. And now I'm going to layer on the pesto. I'm just going to put it on top, just gently. When it all melts and cooks and melts together, it'll all become like a nice pasty mixture. So no need about worrying about laying it on neatly or anything like that. Okay, so we have it in the pan, have the cheese on top. And I'm going to go and cover this up right now. Let's go ahead and press it down. I'm going to get a spatula to make sure that I don't burn my hands while doing this. Now this whole process will probably take about 3 or 4 minutes. I don't encourage you to turn the heat up too much, because if you do that, you might just end up burning the bread, which might be something if you enjoy like slightly more toasted bread, you can do that. But in this case, I'm going to keep it still at a low to medium heat because I want the cheese to melt. I want the temperature of the entire combination of everything to warm up to a point where the cheese and the sauce all melt and blend very nicely together. So one of the things I have not done is actually grease the pan or add any kind of butter or mayo to the bread itself to toast it. Now, if you like that kind of flavor, you can absolutely do that. I'm trying to keep it where it's going to be more dry on the outside, so I deliberately chose not to add butter, oil, or mayo, but you can absolutely do that, and then you'll be, your sandwich will taste just fine. So it's cooked for a few minutes on one side, about 3 minutes. Then we're going to flip it over. And gotta be slightly careful about it, especially when it's like not fully melted. All right, now I turn it over. And feel free to move to the edge of the pan as well, just so the edges get burned. And you also are creating more of a seal where the heat from the pan can heat more parts of the cheese and have it be melted. And you know, you don't need to overwork the bread in any way. Just leave it here, let it just cook in its own speed. It'll take time. It's not the fastest of things that you can work on. Now, here's a trick. If you want it done much, much faster, you can actually take the bread, don't toast it yet. Once the cheese and the mixture and the pesto are on it, you can put it in the microwave and heat the whole thing for about 30 seconds or 45 seconds. That will cause the entire cheese to melt and everything inside to be pretty soft and runny. But then you put that on a hot pan that causes the outside of the bread to become crispy. And that also creates a good texture, especially if you're running late on time and you need to get it up and running quickly. That's something you can totally do as well. In this case, we have some time to kill. So we're taking the scenic route and making this all work. You can see that the bread is starting to have a nice golden brown color, at least the side that we have cooked so far. Now let's go ahead and turn it over and just keep moving it to make sure that it doesn't burn on any one side too much. And there's still more time that needs to cook, so you can see the side is, it's getting dry, but it hasn't changed color yet. I like to wait for it to get at least about 50% darker than the original color of the bread itself. Not quite burnt, but definitely enough to give you that crunch caused by the bread cooking on this very dry heat caused by a pan that has not been seasoned. So it's going to take a little bit longer, but the cheese is slowly melting. You can see on the side the cheese is starting to come out, the kind of ooze off the edges and the crumbs. That's okay. It's totally fine. We can scrape it off and add it back to the bread, especially if it doesn't stick to the pan itself. All right, so I think our bread is ready. So I'm going to quickly just cut it to show you exactly how it looks. I'm going to cut it at a slight angle. I'm going to cut it in the pan itself, which is totally fine. And then now I'm going to turn it around. You can cut it properly. When I turn it around, you can see that the cheese has melted very nicely and the sauce is also getting nicely mixed in with the cheese. So it's time for us to go and put it on a plate and then go ahead and serve it. So let me go ahead and just scoop each part of it out. And there we go. A very simple grilled cheese sandwich that has the basic ingredients of a grilled cheese, bread and cheese, but also happens to have an extra twist where it goes along with the cilantro pesto. Hope you all enjoyed it. And description, the video below will contain all the ingredients you'll need and any tips and tricks that might help you out along the way. Right, see you all next time.